Trump, I think it's fair to say, I don't mean to be hypercritical, but I think it's fair to say that Trump probably doesn't believe much of anything other than, he believes in winning, he believes in his own influence, and yet he is more than willing to leverage white Christian nationalist rhetoric to be able to mobilize those audiences who do believe that. And lastly, we are seeing white Christian nationalism is increasingly becoming an identity in and of itself. It's increasingly being something that people are now embracing as a name, as a term, and calling themselves Christian nationalists. Now, why is it white? Like, let me make sure I'm clear about that. Oftentimes, we find in our surveys that people of color affirm our questions that we ask about Christian nationalist ideology. They affirm those statements with the same regularity that white Americans do. It's not just a white thing. But we find consistently that when white Americans tick the box on these kinds of ideology, these kinds of beliefs, that America is a Christian nation, we should institutionalize it as such, that we should get back to our Christian heritage, Christian values, no separation of church and state, those kinds of things. It means something fundamentally different for white Americans than it does for people of color, especially African Americans. For white Americans, it seems to connect with this idea of nostalgia for an earlier time where the right people were in charge, where the right cultural values held sway. When African Americans affirm those same kinds of questions, it does not seem to indicate that they want to go back to an earlier time where the right people were in charge or have those values held sway. It is more aspirational. It seems to evoke the idea that America should have been a nation that valued justice, that valued equality, but never quite became that. And so what makes it white? It seems to be, this ideology at least, it seems to be organized, this idea that America is founded by and for people who are shaped by white Christian ethnoculture.
Mm-hmm. So picking up on that, Bishop Curry, you're a black man in America and a church leader who grew up in the South. So I want to ask you how white Christian nationalism has personally affected your life. How big a threat is it to you and your country? And what do you fear most about white Christian nationalism?
Well, I think what we're describing as white Christian nationalism, let me frame it that way, is not conservative Christianity. Obviously, it's not liberal Christianity either. Mm-hmm. What we're actually describing is an ideology that's not really a religion, but it looks like a religion and invokes language and symbols that have religious trappings. Mm-hmm. So I want to distinguish between genuine evangelicals, conservative Christians who are conservative. Believe it or not, when you get Jesus in your heart, you could turn out to be a Republican as well as a Democrat. You see, Jesus isn't about that. I mean, there's some values that come with that, but how you apply those in your life can vary. What we're describing and what the professor is really getting at is something that has been around a long time. Now, I think some innocent people are being fooled by it. Let me be clear about that. It's been around a long time. Let us not forget that chattel slavery in America was justified by pro-slavery Christian-sounding voices. That's right. Now, when you take those arguments and lay them alongside Jesus of Nazareth, let's just take Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. I'm just picking one passage. Or let's just take Luke 4, or let's just take Matthew 25, or let's just take all four of the Gospels, lay the image of Jesus of Nazareth that you see there alongside the arguments that were used to maintain slavery, and you will see a wide gap that cannot be closed. The same is true if you look at the complex of white Christian nationalism as an ideology. You lay it alongside Jesus of Nazareth, and we're not even talking about the same thing. Right. So that's why I think it's important to make a distinction, and that's what you've done, between what is an ideology, which in America you have the right to hold, but I would argue you don't have the right to claim that it's Christian. Right. If you want to exclude folk, if you don't want to live what Jesus was real clear, you shall love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang all the law and the prophets. That's it. I mean, he just said everything Moses was talking about. That's it. Now, does this sound like loving neighbor? No. If I love my neighbor, I want my neighbor to be as safe and secure as I am. I want my neighbor to have the same rights that I do. But once upon a time, and I remember my grandma talking about this from Eastern North Carolina, she talked about the hooded men. And when I was a little kid, I didn't know what grandma was talking about, hooded men. I didn't know what she was talking about.
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. Now, white Christian nationalism is not simply religious belief, patriotism, or Christianity itself. Remember that white Christian nationalism is a political ideology that fuses three elements. That's whiteness, Christianity, and national identity, right? They converge them into a single framework of belonging. Understand, the basis of this asserts that the United States was founded by and for and as Christians nation defined by white cultural dominance. That's what they believe, right? This ideology treats Christianity not as a faith, tradition rooted in ethics and spirituality. It treats it as a civil religion used to legitimize political power. And understand, it is the same tool that was used to enslave black people. So in short, white Christian nationalism didn't start today. It started times back during slavery because Christianity itself condemned slavery, right? So there is a point of correction to majority of people that normally think that Christianity itself led to slavery. You need to understand that it is, the Christian white nationalism, right? It is the one that made it possible for black people to be enslaved. So talking about all those things and all factors put in place, I believe that the cultural dominance that is rooted, because it treats Christianity not as a faith rooted in ethics and spirituality, but a religion used to legitimize power to black people. Scholars emphasize that white Christian nationalism functions less as theology and more as a boundary-making project, determining who is the real American and who is considered to be a threat to the national's moral and political order. Brothers and sisters, I'm going to let you watch this video. It is an educative video, of course, right? Because we all need to know the truth. We all need to make things clear to people to avoid all this confusion and all these debates that go around Christianity, right? But I'm going to let you watch the video, and then I'll be back. I'll be sharing my thoughts in regards to this. So let's keep watching the video. I'll be back, and then I'll be giving my 2 cents in regards to this. If you know you're watching it for the first time, I'm just asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership, and really get to what I can offer you. But until then, let's watch the video. I'll be back.
She was talking about the Klan brothers. They claim to be Christian. Now, was that Christianity? Really? Was that Christian? Lay that next to Jesus. And you begin to discover that we're not talking about a religious perspective at all. We actually are talking about an ideology that is cloaked in religious language and that uses religious symbols, but that actually isn't that at all. And I think part of our task, and these guys are better at it than I am, but part of our task is to help normal people, the sensible center, to be clear that, wait a minute, Christianity is about the way of Jesus of Nazareth. It is about the way of living love in our lives for real. And anything that's not that is not Christianity. It can be something else. I mean, in America, you got a right to your opinion. Yeah. Right or wrong, you got a right to it. But it's not that. And so I just think right on target. But I want to frame this as really not religion at all, but ideology.
In fact, it's the use and abuse of religion for ideology or for an ethnic culture or for a political agenda, right? I've often struck by how a lot of new white Christian nationalists weren't before practicing people of faith at all, but now they're white Christian nationalists. So Amanda, you have studied this as much as anybody. Your organization, in fact, you lead a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. I love that title. I want to ask you, is white Christian nationalism a bigger threat to our democracy or to the churches, or both? And is it, as Bishop Curry was suggesting, mainly a political movement or a religious movement, or both?
Well, I'm going to add another threat. It's a huge threat. I think I agree with you that it's the biggest threat to our democracy today. I think it's a huge threat to a faithful Christian life and to a flourishing Christianity in this country. And I think it's the single biggest threat to religious freedom for all that we face in America today. Because Christian nationalism as a political ideology and a cultural framework creates second-class citizens for everyone who's not Christian in their view. And so I think we can boil down every threat to religious freedom into that foundational value that can unite us as Americans. You know, Christianity cannot and does not unite us as Americans, but what can unite us as Americans is this foundational value that our belonging in American culture and society will never be premised on what we believe or how we practice or how we identify religiously or even if we identify as a religious person.
Right.
So I think we have to be very clear that these are threats to all of these things that we hold dear as Americans, as Christians, and as people who value religious freedom. I do think that it is primarily a political movement, and I agree that we have to distinguish it from Christianity. And I think based on just what you were saying about how complicit the church was in slavery, in segregation, in lynchings, in all of those things that came, that we have to acknowledge that American Christianity has been compromised by Christian nationalism for centuries. And so I would love to be able to completely separate the two and say that they have nothing to do with each other, and I think we cannot do that. And that's one of the things we are trying to do at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, is ask individual Christians and congregations to be very self-critical and to examine their own theologies and religious practices and see how much has Christian nationalism impacted my understanding of Christianity. Because if we don't get right with our own theologies and our own practice first, we won't be able to be the kind of witness we need to the rest of the world to dismantle Christian nationalism.
Indeed. Now, Sam, you wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post this week, some of you probably read, that was, is white Christian nationalism growing or declining? And you said your answer was both. How is it both declining and growing at the same time?
Yeah. So we've been tracking Christian nationalist ideology for a number of years now. We have data that we've asked similar questions for about 15 years. These are people who started these questions earlier, and we've carried these on just to see how this is changing. And we found that since about 2017, the percentage of Americans who say that the federal government should declare us a Christian nation has declined by about 10%, from about 30% to 20% most recently. That's not a huge drop, but we have several indicators. Pew data has shown this as well. There are several indicators that in the general population, explicit affirming of Christian nationalist ideology among just average people seems to be declining somewhat. Now, does that mean that Christian nationalism is on its dying gasp or about to leave? No, because polarization is such to where Christian nationalism as an ideology, as a political strategy, and as an identity has become a more central facet of American politics, even as grassroots Americans are backing away from explicit identification with those ideologies. You've got, it has become an even greater part of the Republican Party platform, of the kind of rhetoric that conservative politicians who are trying to appeal to a reactionary white Christian base who is very anxious and very angry, to be able to use those kinds of identifying rhetorics, that kind of language of Christian nationalism, the idea that our heritage is being stolen from us, that we need to go back to an earlier time, to use that kind of explicit rhetoric, that has become a more central focus of our politics. And again, this phenomenon, I think this question actually goes into what is old about Christian nationalism and what is new. So let me talk about that for a second. What is old is exactly what the bishop was talking about. This ideology, and Amanda, is centuries old. This ideology that America is for people like us, and they are white, they are Christian, they are native born. But what we see as new is actually how closely tied it is now to political strategy and rhetoric. That is a new thing. How explicit the language of us versus them, anti-Christian persecution, that we are white Americans and Christians are being persecuted and attacked, that we need to take our country back. That is more explicit. But also the identification with the label itself, that people can write books arguing for Christian nationalism by name, that people can take to Twitter. Politicians can take to Twitter and say, the Republican Party ought to be the party of Christian nationalism. That is a new thing. And so the more that becomes the, Republican partisanship or conservative ideological identity becomes coalesced around that identity of Christian nationalists, then that becomes something that its influence belies the shrinking numbers, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So it's become politicized and strategized, and I would say even weaponized.
Yes.
Now,
Yep.
and that's the new dimension here. So Bishop Curry, you and I have been fighting this kind of stuff together for a long time, and yet this kind of stuff keeps growing. So I wonder sometimes, what are we doing wrong? Or what's the story that we need? Or you and I were involved in this movement called Reclaiming Jesus, and I heard you say something about that a few moments ago. Isn't coming back to that the only way to deal with politicized religion? What do we do different, and how can we go forward now in a better way?
You know, I do think, I think on the one hand, it's always important whenever any form of exclusion, I'm hedging from the word bigotry because that's a little bit narrowly focused, but anything that excludes other folk, anything that puts other folk down, even implicitly, anything like that. People of decency and goodwill, whether they're Christian, Jews, Muslim, whatever they are, people of decency and goodwill must stand up and must name it. Silence is complicity. And silence creates a context in which something like that can grow. And when something like that can grow and is allowed to grow, it is like kudzu. I mean, y'all don't have kudzu up north, but anybody know about kudzu? I mean, man, you got to get a goat to take care of kudzu. That's about the only thing that'll stop it. I mean, and it just starts spreading. I mean, just starts spreading. So it has to be, you've got to confront, name it. When a synagogue is assaulted, Christians, Muslims, people of goodwill must stand up and say, this is not the way we want to be. When, and on and I can just go down the list. When LGBTQ folk are attacked, when trans folk are attacked, people of decency and goodwill, no matter what your political, must stand up and speak up. Silence creates an atmosphere for the negative to grow. It really does. So I think that's one thing. I think that we have to have ecumenical, interfaith, bipartisan, multiracial, multicultural, multireligious coalitions of people who just want to stand up for human kindness and decency. So we got to do that. On the other hand, I do think there does have to be the kind of education is a weak word, but the kind of education that brings this conversation to the public to awareness, that there is a counter-narrative. There actually is a way of being Christian that is not exclusive, that is not about putting folk down, that you may vote your way and I may vote my way based on our values and our own discernment, that there is that kind, but that kind of Christianity, see, that's why I think reclaiming Jesus was significant, because sometimes you hear folks saying this is Christianity and they ain't saying nothing about Jesus. Now, I mean, you got to get real at some point and say, hold on, let's talk about the brother. He's supposed to be the Lord. Let's let him be the Lord. And so claiming and reclaiming that and just lifting up, and we talked about the power of the text. Yeah. Lift up the text of the New Testament, specifically the four Gospels. Let Jesus speak. Remember that thing, let your fingers do the walking through the yellow pages years ago? Somebody just walk through the text a little bit and let Jesus talk. Mm-hmm. And then let's lay Jesus aside, anything that claims to be Christian. And if it doesn't match up, then we say, well, that's not Christianity. It may be your opinion. You got a right to your opinion in this country. And I think that kind of education of just normal people. When I say normal, I don't mean anybody's abnormal, but just the kind of the normal folk who go to church, who may be, look, I'm the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. I know full well there are Republicans and Democrats in the Episcopal Church. I don't even need a survey to find that out. You gotta know that. But I'm here to tell you, sensible, good, decent people who are really just trying to be Christian. Right. when they see it, they'll say, I thought that's what it was, but I'm beginning to hear some other things that seem like a different narrative. Mm-hmm. Help them, that kind of education, the kind of thing you're doing and the kind of thing you're doing. We need more of that. And people like me and ordinary clergy, normal clergy in congregations to begin to re-educate ourselves to this Jesus of Nazareth and his way of love as God's way of life. And when we do that, then we can begin to discern. Like the New Testament says in 1 John, test the spirits to see whether they be of God or not.
Mm-hmm. So a good story beats a good argument.
Every day.
So if we just argue about this forever, we're going to be stuck in those little binary categories. Mm-hmm. So what's a story that gets us out of those categories? Yeah. So Amanda, you have warned there's been a dramatic uptick in violent acts inspired by white Christian nationalism, which has been more and more openly embraced. Now we see people with T-shirts, even members of Congress with T-shirts. I'm a white Christian nationalist. It's becoming a T-shirt movement as well, right? So these are threats. They are political threats. They are violent threats. Tell us what you see going on around this during these midterm elections and that whole conversation, the campaigns. I've been reading about this so-called Reawaken America tour. People being baptized, almost like political baptisms, which we quite haven't seen before. The Washington Post calls this a traveling carnival of misinformation that merges entertainment, politics, and theology. Mm-hmm. So what do you see going on, particularly around this whole midterm election time?
Yeah, and before I hit the midterms, you bring up violence, and I have to say that tomorrow is a really somber anniversary. It's the 4-year anniversary of what remains the deadliest attack on Jews in America ever, the shooting at Tree of Life Synagogue. And it was that event coming after other deadly events that really spurred us to action to create Christians Against Christian Nationalism. The fact that people were losing their lives when this ideology was in the hands of violent extremists, right, which makes what we're seeing in the midterm elections so irresponsible, right, because we know what this can lead to. This is not just about electing certain candidates to office, but people's lives are on the line. This Reawaken America tour has been on the road now for almost a year. It first caught my attention last November when there was an event in San Antonio, Texas, where Michael Flynn said the quiet part out loud. He said, we're one nation under God. We should have one religion. One nation under God, one religion under God. So we see what the aim is. This isn't just about repeating lines of civil religion. This is about leading to a theocracy, about one version of Christianity being taken over by the government. And so we've seen this kind of extremist rhetoric combined with misinformation, election lies, COVID lies, and put all in these huge arenas and often in houses of worship. Right. And it really is incredibly irresponsible to be exploiting this as a political strategy. And I think we are at a point that I fear that Christian nationalism is going to be normalized. And I think the only thing that can stop it is for normal people, to stand up and to say, this is not who we are, this is not who we want to be, either as Americans or for those of us who are Christians as Christians, and to do something about it. And it would be great to have some political leadership doing this as well. What's so alarming is when you have someone like a Marjorie Taylor Greene saying, the Republican Party should be the party of Christian nationalism. We didn't have leaders from the Republican Party saying, no, we shouldn't, right? And so then when we do have silence as complicity, then we have the danger of that overtaking. So, I think with all of it, we will have to see whether these candidates who are espousing Christian nationalism actually prevail. That's incredibly alarming, because what could they do once they're in office? But just the use of the political rhetoric is dangerous and alarming as well.
I was on an interfaith call just today, and I was very moved when a young rabbi said, around the Tree of Life anniversary, he said, what meant so much to so many people in that synagogue is when Muslims came to gather around the church to defend the synagogue from its attacks. Muslims came to gather around the Tree of Life synagogue, and how even they were offering to help pay medical bills of people who were attacked. This is the kindness that you were talking about, and the counter message to what we're being heard. So, Sam, you've written that the term Christian in white Christian nationalism is often a dog whistle or code language rather than an actual set of beliefs. How does white Christian nationalism use religion to hide race? Or how is whiteness the hidden link that transforms the story into a political vision? That they want to say, I'm not a Christian nationalist. They sure don't want to say, I'm a white Christian nationalist. But it's there, it's the hidden link, I would say. So how do you see that? How do you expose that?
So part of this is something natural that we all do, is that we take categories of people. And when I say we all do it, I mean this is just a human thing that we tend to do. We tend to lump people into categories together by association of how we think of them. So if I were to ask you to close your eyes, I do this with my students in my sociology of religion classes. I have them close their eyes and I say, okay, I'm going to say some religious words: Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, Southern Baptist, and so usually without exception, they all admit that when I said those religious words, they didn't just think a blank face. They saw a raced face. They saw, when I said Hindu, they thought of an Indian person, Buddhist, an Asian person, Muslim, maybe somebody from the Middle East, and Southern Baptist, they thought of a white person. It is because religion in the United States and elsewhere is racialized. We tend to associate groups with different ethnic backgrounds or different racial backgrounds based on geography, based on history, and those kinds of things. We have found experimentally, this is actually a really common phenomenon among white Christians, primarily because our religious institutions are segregated. Most of you go to most of us, those of us who attend church, are attending religious communities that tend to be segregated, where people who look like us live in our side of the tracks, think like us, talk like us, and that's most Americans. So the reason this becomes a powerful thing, and we've actually demonstrated this experimentally, is those connections can become so implicit and so closely connected that oftentimes referencing one of those identities implies the other one, and it makes people think about the other one. So let me give you an example. We did an experiment with a group of white Christians where we exposed them to different kind of narratives. We gave them different articles, and they were randomly assigned to these things. And we told this group of white Christians, we gave them several narratives. One was about Christians being persecuted. Another one was about white people being persecuted. Another one was about black people being persecuted. And we found that when white Christians read this article about white people being persecuted, it made them also think Christians were being persecuted as well. And when we gave them this article about Christians being persecuted, it made them think white people were being persecuted as well. Now, why is that relevant to our political situation now? Well, if I am a savvy politician and I'm speaking to a white conservative Christian audience that I know is making those connections, then I never have to say white at all. I can just keep on hammering this idea that Christians are persecuted. Christians are under attack. Our way of life is under attack. The anti-Christian left, the godless, atheist, socialist, woke left is coming for your God, for your rights, for your religious freedom. And I have talked about religion, but I have also implied all of these other things. Does that make sense? This is how nefarious white Christian nationalism as a political strategy can be, because I can keep on hammering this idea of anti-Christian persecution and who America really belongs to, Christians like us, when I am implying to these audiences white again and again. So it is actually a very powerful, it actually goes even deeper than dog whistle is a good word for it because it signals to this group. But I often don't think these people are knowing they're even being signaled. I think it could actually work more like a trigger, like a Winter Soldier kind of trigger. Like I have given the code words and you have been activated to respond in this prescribed way with fear of the racial other, with xenophobia, with Islamophobia, with the fear of Black Lives Matter or Colin Kaepernick or whoever. That just because you have used this kind of like charged religious language now I think in racial terms. And that I think is a big danger with how this kind of rhetoric, this kind of this Christian persecution rhetoric is being used to stoke fear, not just against religious others, but against racial others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the dog whistle means we got to name what Bishop Curry was saying. Name this is white Christian nationalism,
Right.
not just Christian nationalism. So we got to give name to the dog whistle that's there because it's core, and also it's reflecting the clear political vision and tactics that are going on now. So name it, as you were saying. So back to Amanda, white Christian nationalism showed up on January 6th. I mean, many of us were kind of struck by, placards and signs and Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president. And they prayed on the floor of the Senate after they took it over. So what'd you see in all that, and what have you seen since? We had Jamie Raskin here on these chairs a while ago, and the General Committee is talking about all of this going on, and they haven't really addressed directly this religion question. But we saw all that going on. So how do you interpret that from what you saw? And what do you see going forward now post January 6th?
Yeah. Well, like you and like probably most people in this audience, in addition to the horror of seeing what was going on at the Capitol on January 6th, it was only intensified to see symbols of my faith being used to attack democracy in Jesus' name. And so seeing that, and we had already been working at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, we at BJC, working with our partners at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, worked together with contributors like Sam Perry to put out a report that details all of the instances of Christian nationalism that we could find, not just on January 6th, but in the many events that led up to January 6th. And I think that's what's often missing in the conversation about Christian nationalism and January 6th is how this ideology really worked to work this group into a place that would lead them to take these previously unthinkable actions of actually attacking the Capitol and trying to interfere with the election results using deadly force when they needed to. This report is available at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org, free downloads. And we did an event to talk about this earlier this year, and it instantly got the attention of Congress, including the January 6th committee. And so a group of us, including Jim and Bishop Curry, we signed a letter, we sent it to the January 6th committee and asked them to study Christian nationalism and what impact it had in bolstering and intensifying that attack on the Capitol. Because what we found is that it worked to unify a disparate group of people. There are a lot of different people who came to the Capitol that day, and some of them were from extremist groups like Oath Keepers and Proud Boys, and some of them were everyday Americans who got on a plane to fly there. How did they all come together? Christian nationalism helps explain why they did what they did. And so I think, Christian nationalism alone cannot explain what happened on January 6th, but we will not understand what happened on January 6th until we have a thorough accounting of Christian nationalism. So the committee has had a lot on their plate, including new evidence that came to light. And because of their investigation, the investigation's ongoing. But I really do hope that the committee will address Christian nationalism directly And I think there is one thing we haven't talked about yet, but I think there is a concern on some people's parts that to attack Christian nationalism or to challenge Christian nationalism is in some way to challenge Christianity. And we hope that Christian voices can help say, no, not at all. Right. You know, we think that you need to address Christian nationalism if we are going to have a strong Christian witness. And so we need more Christians, including Christian lawmakers who are willing to take on Christian nationalism.
Clearly, if there was a religious undergirding to January 6th, it was this. It was white Christian. It was Christian placards and signs that made many of us just feel stunned and deeply sad and ashamed. But there was no other religious undergirding. It was this. And I think the committee is nervous about talking about religion in that political context for fear of it seeming divisive or attacking. So it's back to what Bishop Curry said. It's the question, this is my next question for you. Is this Christian? Is this Christianity? Is this, you and I talk about the need for a counter message. We can't just say, white Christian nationalism is wrong, it's a threat, it's bad, let's all be against it. Because that falls into the old binaries. So how do we do a counter message where, no, this is not Christianity, this is something else, but it's not that. And that's why I like to focus on the gospel texts. It's almost like, here are the texts, right? Here are these iconic texts that we all know. You know these texts. And end the conversation with, do we believe it or not? If we believe it, we can't do this stuff. If we don't, let's say we don't. But then you can say, I don't believe those texts. So as you wrestle with this counter message, how do we go through the yellow pages, but the Gospels, I love that, fingers there. How do we get them? How do we get that out? That's more than education, is what you said. It's really pastoring. You're the pastor of your church. It's formation. Mm-hmm. It's spiritual formation, not just education.
Yeah. The reality is, now I'm just dealing with Christians now. I mean, let me just stay there. I've been ordained over 40 years now. I'm not as old as Jim Wallace, but I mean, I've been ordained for 40 years. And I must say that I'm not sure that I have effectively over those 40 years, and I think I've done some, I know I've done good, I'm not putting myself down, but I don't know that we have, but I'll speak for myself, effectively formed or helped as midwives to form the people who have been committed to our charge as pastors, to let, as St. Paul says, so that Christ is formed in them. Yeah. And so that their lives, our lives, actually reflect his life. Yeah. And I think that's where we've fallen short. Yeah. And I'll own that myself, but not stop there. Now the work is to actually engage the kind of formation that a counter-narrative that actually is a narrative of what Christianity is about. I mean, when we did Reclaiming Jesus, I mean, the truth is we were evangelical, we were mainline Protestant, we were Roman Catholic. I can't remember if we had any Orthodox there, and we spanned the spectrums. Yeah. I mean, in that room. But we were able to sit down and say, we can agree that this is what Jesus is about. Yeah. And it was pretty substantial. Now, if if an ecumenical group of Christians can say, okay, we're liberal, we're conservative, there were Republicans in there, Democrats, you name an issue, and we were probably going to disagree on a whole lot. But the fact that there was a common core, we talk about that in academia sometimes. There actually is a core of Christianity that if we lift it up and help folk begin to live in that and engage that as what Christianity is, that becomes the counter-narrative in and of itself when it is effectively lived and proclaimed. I just think that's how you do it. The thing is, something else struck me. I mean, Amanda said, I am struck. I mean, tomorrow is the anniversary of Tree of Life. The power of language and the danger of implicitly violent and exclusionary language coded in acceptable forms. That's seditiously dangerous because innocent people get fooled. And it's harder to counter that, although a counternarrative does it. But sometimes that's where that has to be named.
Yeah.
That when you're really talking about excluding folk, when you're really talking about hurting folk, when you're really talking about discriminating against folk, when that's really what's going on, that has to just be named. And named with love. Because you're better than that. I'm better than that. We're better than that. But that's got to be named. And anyway, I'm just saying that you should conjure that up, that we do have, I mean, it is not an accident. I was at Mother Emanuel, I guess it was last year, with the anniversary of the killings there. And literally, I went from there to Birmingham, where at an Episcopal church, folk had gotten. I mean, one day was one way, one another. The young man who was there, Liz Eaton from the ELCA, was there with us. The young man who did that, now he had a lot of issues. There's a lot going on, so it's not just a simple thing. But part of what motivated him, or catalyzed him, or triggered him, or whatever, was language of taking America back and making it a Christian nation again. It was. I grew up in both the North and the South. And in the North part is Buffalo, home of the Buffalo Bills, who are on a winning streak at the moment, but you never know where they last. But I grew up not far from that Tops grocery store. Used to ride my bike by there. The guy who did that was triggered again by this same rhetoric, this same languaging. Uvalde, a similar thing has been documented, that there was this language of violent, Robert McAfee Brown years ago taught us about violent language begets violence, and it can do it in subtle, insidious ways. And that's where it becomes dangerous, as you say. And we've got to counter that. I mean, we have got to counter that and name it. It's got to be named, and then help folk move beyond that and say, now here's what Christianity is about. And here's, that's, anyway, I'll stop. But
No, following
I
up.
don't even remember what your question was, but that's good.
That's the right question. Following up, you answered the question. Following up on that, Sam, I was struck, you called white Christian nationalism the San Andreas fault of American politics. And you end your book, Flag and the Cross, must read again, with a warning. You write that January 6th is not the end. We could see another violent power grab, larger and more violent than the first, which could bury American democracy for at least a generation. So, do you think another event like that could be on the horizon, or something even more successful?
I think to the extent that political leaders are comfortable using that kind of divisive, reactionary rhetoric, this us versus them, that we are no longer Americans who share common values, but we are. And in fact, we're actually seeing something like this. A political scientist named Paul Jupe, who's done some phenomenal work. He's doing some work on Christian nationalism right now, and he's looked at how Christian nationalism corresponds to things like acceptance of violence against others, political violence. And he found that when Christian nationalism is combined with things like apocalyptic language and belief, a belief that we as a world, as culture, as a nation are headed towards some kind of apocalyptic, Armageddon-like battle between good and evil, that those two things combined together contribute to the acceptance of political violence, which makes complete sense, because on the Christian nationalism side, you've got this idea that something has been taken from you wrongly, and on the other side, you've got this idea that the stakes are so high that this is not just about Democrats versus Republicans. It's not about who won the latest election cycle and how'd you do in the midterms. It is literally God versus Satan, angels versus demons. And that's the kind of rhetoric we're seeing. So the Reawaken America tour, and other speakers like Roger Stone. Roger Stone has gone on record several times in public speeches to say that this is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is about angels and demons. This is about if we lose, we plunge the nation to 1,000 years of darkness. Now, think about you sitting in the pews and you sitting and listening to that kind of rhetoric. What are the links to which you would go to prevent America from doing that? I mean, of course, that would stoke that kind of partisan violence. So I think to the extent that political actors are comfortable using that kind of rhetoric and language to divide, to up the stakes, and to say that this isn't just about political victories, this is actually some kind of a religious or God loses if we lose. Of course, I mean, I think you're setting yourself up for the kinds of conditions. Will it necessarily result in violence? I think it's a combination of conditions that leads to that. But I think you're certainly setting the ideological table for that to happen.
So we've talked about some very tough things tonight. This isn't just our topic for this month. Next month, we'll move on to the next. This is with us. It's deep in us. So, but I want to end on a bit of hope here. I'd like, given all this, I'd like each of you to quickly offer some reasons why you think white Christian nationalism can be defeated. Each of you, give me some hope here about what we could, because out there, I know a lot of you are not thinking, well, that's an interesting evening I went to. That was now I'm going to go home and watch. I've got a couple shows to watch at home. So, no, this is you're thinking, what do I do?
Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the channel. I'm hoping that you're doing great from wherever you're watching me from. Now, understand that the origins of white Christian nationalism can be traced to the colonial period, where Protestant Christianity was used to justify settler expansion, indigenous displacement, and African enslavement. Biblical narratives were selectively interpreted to portray European conquest as divinely ordained and non-white people as subordinates or outside God's plan for civilization. This theological framing allowed racial hierarchy to be presented as a moral order, from slavery through Jim Crow to Christianity, which was repeatedly used to justify, to sanctify inequality, framing democracy as compatible with exclusion. Thus, white Christian nationalism was not a deviation from American history, but from a constitutive force in shaping early American political identity, right? Also in the same line, you get to see that democracy in its modern sense is based on pluralism, equal citizenship, regardless of race, regardless of religion, or belief. I mean, that's generally, right? White Christian nationalism fundamentally contradicts this principle. Why? Because it does this by privileging one racial and religious identity as normative. It undermines the democratic idea that sovereignty rests with all people. Understand that political theorists note that when a nation defines itself through a single religious identity, dissent becomes framed as heresy rather than a legitimate disagreement. This erodes democratic norms such as minority rights, such as religious freedom, such as peaceful political competition, replacing them with moral absolution and exclusion, right? Also, another thing that you need to note is white Christian nationalism has historically influenced laws, court rulings, and public policy, which often indirectly it has shaped debates around voting rights, immigration, education, and civil rights by framing inclusion as moral decay and exclusion as a cultural preservation. In practice, this ideology tends to support policies that restrict democratic participation, such as voter suppression or the delegitimization of electoral outcomes. When demographic or political shifts threaten white Christian dominance, the danger lies not only in explicit rhetoric, but in how religious symbolism is used to justify anti-democratic actions while maintaining a veneer of moral righteousness. So you understand the contradiction that happens in between the two, right? I'm also going to be talking about the modern resurgence and political mobilization. Understand that in recent decades, white Christian nationalism has experienced a resurgence driven by demographic change, declining religious affiliations, and the perceived the perceived loss of cultural authority among white Christians. And now, sociologists argue that this resurgence is fueled less by faith than by status anxiety. The fear of becoming one group among many in a multicultural, multi-religious society. Political movements have successfully mobilized this anxiety by framing democracy itself as a threat, portraying election, courts, and media as illegitimate when they do not reinforce a Christian nationalistic worldview. This dynamic transforms disagreement into an existential conflict. That's what you need to understand. Because I'm also going to be talking about, in regards to what I've just said, the threat to democratic norms and institutions. And this is where I'm going to explain it. You need to understand that the most serious danger posed by white Christian nationalism is its willingness to subordinate democratic rules to religious nationalist goals. Understand that when political outcomes are interpreted as expression of God's will, compromise becomes impossible. And institutional checks, that's codes, legislatures, constitutions, all of these, you need to understand that they are viewed as obstacles rather than safeguards. And this mindset, brothers and sisters, it creates a fertile ground for authoritarianism, where strong leaders are celebrated by bypassing democratic process in the name of moral restoration. You understand that history shows that democracies erode not only through violence, but through the normalization of exclusionary ideologies that redefine citizenship itself, right? So just let me know what you think, right? Because it's really crazy. Another thing that I would like to add on top of that is the erosion of constitutional secularism. Let me explain. A core safeguard of American democracy is constitutional secularism. The principle is that the state does not privilege one religion over others. White Christian nationalism steadily undermines this foundation by reframing secular governance as hostility towards Christianity rather than neutrality. This inversion is dangerous because it redefines constitutional limits as oppression and religious dominance as freedom. When courts, schools, or public institutions are pressured to reflect a specific Christian moral order, democratic neutrality collapses, because the result is a legal and political environment where citizenship becomes implicitly conditional upon religious conformity, marginalizing religious minority, non-believers, and even Christians who reject nationalist interpretation of their own faith. And over time, this corrodes trust in democratic institutions, as they no longer perceived as impartial arbitrators, but as instruments of cultural enforcement. Another deeply destabilizing effect of white Christian nationalism is its transformation of exclusion into a moral good. I understand that democratic systems rely on idea that disagreements and diversity are legitimate and manageable through law and deliberation. White Christian nationalism, however, reframes pluralism as moral chaos and diversity as civilization decline. In the worldview, excluding certain groups from political power, cultural legitimacy, or even basic recognition becomes an act of righteousness rather than discrimination. This moralization of exclusion makes democratic repair extremely difficult because it removes ethical restraints on anti-democratic behavior. When inequality is framed as divinely sanctioned order, democracy is no longer merely contested, it is morally rejected. And now you understand how this poses a big problem to democracy in the United States. And so, brothers and sisters, I'm calling upon all of you to really let me know what you're thinking about this issue. What's your take? How do you feel about white Christian nationalism? And how has it affected you in any sphere? What do you feel about all this? Because these are topics that we need to talk about. These are topics we need to discuss. Remember that it is all about education. It's all about us getting to know the truth and understanding and dissecting all these issues, right? So please let me know what you feel and think about this video. I'm your host and presenter, Ejidok Stories. But until then, let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salud.